are live. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another camera class. Today is the first Thursday of the month, so we will be doing the Intro to Photography or Basic Cameras. Let me pull it up. I have a couple students in class with me, and then anybody who's watching online. As always, if you have any questions, just feel free to chat in, and anybody in class interrupt me at any point in time and ask. Let me close the door. As I was saying a little earlier, basic cameras or camera basics usually goes the longest because there's the most amount of information. But the way that I sum the class up is that we're graduating from our smartphone. We've maybe realized that what photos that the phone can take are great, but they're just not up to the quality that we want. Maybe we're a content creator or we're a business owner who wants to get into photographing or documenting our work, but doesn't want to pay for a photographer price. So we invest into a really nice camera, and now we need to learn how to use it. Or we're in the market to buy a camera and we don't know quite yet what to do. So that's what this class is for. If at any point in time I'm talking too fast, let me know. So I like to start with this, where to go when all else fails. I always recommend strongly read the owner's manual, take a look at all that stuff. There's a lot of good tips and tricks in there, but most importantly it shows you what the buttons mean. There's a lot of buttons to your cameras, there's a lot of menu settings there, so it is nice if you can just kind of familiarize yourself with it a little bit. There's a lot going on in the camera, so even if you can't remember it right now, you might be able to look back on it. Imaging Resource is a really awesome website and blog. If you have any problems or concerns, you can ask a question on there. And there are tons of people out there who are willing to answer and help. There's also a podcast. It's very nerdy. It's very camera spec and number and detail and megapixel oriented. So it might not be everyone's cup of tea, but they do have some really good tidbits or nuggets of information on there that I think are worthwhile. Hi there, guys. Welcome in.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Have a seat. We just started.
Oh, good.
I also recommend the Canon, Nikon, and Sony website. All three brands have a fantastic website with educational tabs and tips in there. Even if you're a Canon user, Nikon has, in my opinion, one of the best websites for it. Tons of really awesome information on there. And Sony, same idea too. And my personal favorite, I put it on the very bottom though, is YouTube. If ever you have a question, if you type in your camera model and how to use or how to set up or 10 things you didn't know about XYZ camera, you're going to get a ton of information on that unit, and it's really cool. You can get stuff that's a minute to 2 minutes long, all the way up to, I've seen one video on the camera I own that the guy went for 2 hours and just did not stop talking about his camera. Yeah. So a lot of really nice ways that you can get information to help you with your camera, so you don't have to just rely on asking your friend or just kind of winging it. So the first place I start with everything, which I think is the most important, is your SD card. The SD card is the kind of brain or the operating point that saves and keeps the storage of your photos, and for video too. Now, I recommend you always have 2 of these, and the reason being is that the SD card on the very back has copper contact strips that insert into the camera. After a period of time, those will become dull, they get worn out, and you can kind of see that as it's going on. Some people will take some isopropyl alcohol and clean it off. You can try that. Sometimes though, a card is done when it's done. Constant use is really what causes that. So if you're going far away and you're preparing for a photo shoot or doing something, I might recommend having 2 cards with you just to be on the safe side. But typically within this, I recommend a couple different things, which...
Do they go bad?
They can go bad. That's why you should have 2 of them. It's the back part of the card. So it's this copper material that's on there. And after a few times, or not a few times, but after, let's say, 3 or 4 years of use of you removing the card and inserting it in and out, eventually those get worn out. So having a second one is always a good idea. The other thing too is that, and I'll explain in a second, your photos don't live on your memory card. It's kind of a transportation unit. The joke that I use with them is that if your camera is your house and then your computer is work, you're basically going in between both of them with your SD card. So the SD card is a tool to get the photos from the camera to your computer.
I have a question. Can you go from your camera to your iPad?
You can. There are ways, especially with the newer iPad, they introduced the Files app on there. Files then allows you basically to act as if the iPad is its own laptop with its own kind of file storage system. When you plug the camera in, you should then be able to access the SD card and then go from there. I strongly recommend removing the card and inserting it into whatever device it is via an SD card reader, only because that if there is something that goes wrong with the transfer, sometimes it can screw up the camera. It's very unlikely, but it can happen every once in a while. So
See, that's what happened to me on Saturday. I tried to remove it from my laptop, and it said, they're fixing it right, I don't know what, but it said that I didn't go to the eject to take it out.
Yes.
So then I was gonna go put it back in my card,
Mhm.
but then it says, do not use this,
Yeah.
whatever,
Be
so.
careful with that. So, and I'll talk about that in a second too. But we always want to eject the SD card prior to pulling it out. We'll talk about that next. One thing I do recommend with SD cards is, depending on what you're trying to do, 64 gigabytes is a good starting point. That's good for photo and for video, but primarily photo. Depending on how powerful your camera is, that will then dictate how much storage space a file takes up. I'd say average photo is between about 8 megabytes to 30 to 40 megabytes. Just keep taking those, and eventually it adds up and fills up a 64 gigabyte SD card. The other thing to keep in mind are the speeds on the cards. You'll see areas that say 95 megabytes or 70 megabytes, and usually it'll read it somewhere on the card. What that's referring to is the read and the write speed of the card. When we're taking photos, those are going into the camera. Our camera is reading that information in, so it's processing it onto the SD card. When we download the information from one to the other, that's the write speed. That's the speed at which your camera is taking the information and writing it onto the computer. Depending on how strong or how powerful your stuff is. Hi there, guys. Welcome in.
Sorry.
Here for the camera class?
Huh?
Here for the camera class?
Yeah.
Awesome. Have a seat. Depending on how or what you're doing exactly, you should make sure that you get something that has a high read and write speed. If you're doing stuff that's in 4K video, or you have a really powerful camera that's got 24 plus megapixels, then it's a lot of information the camera's taking in and then having to write. So to avoid stressing the SD card out, just get something with a higher speed. If you're shooting with an entry-level camera, or it's a simple point-and-shoot camera and you're just taking photos, you don't have to worry too much about it. 64 gigabytes will be just fine. Just get a card that works for your budget.
So for a regular like photo shoot, you still recommend a 64
I'd say
gig?
64 at the least.
Okay.
Yeah, just to be on the safe side, make sure you have enough space. Especially if you forget to maybe to download and delete all the images. I've done that before, where I'll do a photo shoot and then I forget to clear out the SD card, but as long as I had enough space on there, I should be able to get the next
And if
part
you
done.
have 2 cards, if your camera has 2 cards, still get each of them to be?
I mean, you can go for a smaller size if you really want. 32 is not a bad number. It really just kind of comes down to what you get. I personally always say go with 64 as like a starting point. But if you need more or less, you can do that if you need it.
Okay.
Whatever's easiest.
I'm sorry, but what did you say about the speed?
Speed. On the side of the cards, there's a read and write speed for megabytes. Always try to get something that has a faster read and write speed. So typically you'll see cards like SanDisk or the ProMaster ones that we have. They can be anywhere between 80 megabytes a second all the way to 280 megabytes a second. There's a speed at which they're reading the information as it's coming into the camera, and then the speed at which they're writing the information as it comes out of
So
the
the
camera.
higher the number, the better?
Yes.
Okay.
Is there a special way to eject the SD card from your camera, or
No.
that's fine just to?
That one's fine to just pull out. I have the next steps coming up where I'll talk more about the process I do when I'm downloading photos. Yes.
Is there a certain brand that you recommend of an SD card, or does it not matter?
No, I mean, it depends. Everybody has their preference on it. SanDisk has really nice, like, not loyalty, but there's a term for it, a backup system, where even if, let's say, your card is damaged, there's a good chance you could send the card into SanDisk, and they can retrieve anything that was damaged and unable to come off.
Oh, wow.
I personally use the ProMaster cards we sell here. I've, knock on wood, been using them for the past 4 years. No issues on my end. Lexar is another really trusted and popular brand, and then Sony makes some of the fastest cards out there, but they are a little more expensive. So it really depends on what's in your budget. I don't see Samsung making them as much anymore, and then PNY and Adata.
What's the one from here?
ProMaster.
Those are good ones.
They're good.
I use both, yeah.
Yeah. So, next slide. Your picture shouldn't live on the memory card, like I kind of mentioned earlier. I always use the analogy of the car. If the cameras are home and then your computer is work, the SD card is driving in between the two of them to download everything. That could also be your laptop, or sorry, not laptop, but iPad as well too. That could be your phone too. There's some really awesome cameras out there. I think everybody who's got a camera has it. It's the transfer system that they have. If you download whatever app is associated with your camera, you can download everything to the phone. It does reduce the picture quality, but if maybe there's a couple photos you want to send to friends or email to family or post on social media, that might be an easy way of getting them on, especially if you're out.
So you should just transfer them and then delete them?
Yeah, and that's what we're going to talk about next.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry, what was the way that you said it's not as good of quality if you do what?
If you transfer them from camera to phone.
Oh.
Oh.
So it'll diminish the quality slightly, just being that like if you try to like zoom or blow up the image, then it might start to look a little grainy and
Pixelated,
pixelated.
yeah.
Yeah. So do it on the computer if you're trying to really edit or look at stuff in fine detail. But if you want to put a picture or two on Instagram, then by all means transfer to your phone.
Is that the same too when you do like the Bluetooth transfer?
Yes.
versus taking out the
That's
SD?
the same way, yeah. So if you're doing Bluetooth transfer through the app, it'll diminish. But if you're just taking the SD card out and inserting it into the phone, that's totally fine too.
So once you transfer, say you transfer to your iPad, can you transfer it again to your computer
You
later?
can, yeah. It's up to you.
It's not deleted?
Not deleted.
Until you-
Not until you delete it.
Okay.
And that's what I'll show next. So my steps for what to do when you
But it
ha-
doesn't change the pixels when you transfer back and forth?
No, because you're not you're moving them to one location. You're not moving it to one and then moving it to the other. If that makes sense. All the photos still live on the SD card. You're just transferring them to different devices.
Devices, okay.
So you're basically making copies of them, and that's where then my process for how to do this comes in. So this is what I do every time I have my camera and I'm ready to take photos off. I start by turning off the camera and waiting at least 5 seconds. And if you start shooting on the camera and you do stuff, turn it off, hold it next to your ear. You can hear the internal components shutting
Shut
down.
down.
That just gives it enough time for it to power down, make sure everything's saved, and that you're not damaging the card or losing any pictures by removing it too quickly. Then you remove it from the physical camera, so remove the card out of the camera and put it into a card reader. I do recommend to try to avoid using your camera to transfer photos to your device. So a lot of the times you get a cable with the camera that you can then plug into the computer and download everything. There's a couple different things that could go wrong with it. I use the story of the water bottle or wine glass sitting next to you as you're maybe editing and going through stuff. You spill that onto it. If you damage the SD card, a lot of the times you can just get another one and be done with it. But if you spill it all over your brand new $1,000 camera, you might be upset.
I just bought a Apple computer here and I had to get the connector for the camera thing. Is it okay to put the
Yeah, you put the SD card into the
SD
connector.
card in there and then the transfer, right?
Yep.
Okay.
What is it? What I was just talking to you about, like a
That's like a
hard
USB
drive?
thumb drive. I don't have any images of that, but it's like a external hard drive that would plug into the computer, and then you can download stuff back and forth.
Oh, okay. Do you know what it's called? I mean, does it
A
have?
thumb drive. It's or a hard drive, SSD. There's a few different names.
Is
for
it the
them.
thing that I just brought that cord for?
I don't know. I didn't
that
see
USB
the cord. I
file?
only saw the actual SD card that you got.
Oh, okay.
What
I
is that, what is that 4A mean to try to avoid using your camera?
So that's what I was just saying. So instead of taking your camera and plugging a cable into it and then plugging it into the computer, you should remove the SD card and insert that into the computer.
Right to the,
To the drive, to the
Drive.
yeah, to the SD card reader. So that's one reason to, let's say that you're transferring stuff and for whatever reason the computer dies in the middle of you transferring or has an error, there's a good chance too it could delete off the camera as well, which would be a bummer if you lost all your stuff. So my recommendation is to always try to avoid using the camera to transfer images into the computer via a cable. Remove the SD card, insert that into the computer, and download your photos that way. The next steps that I would then do would be making sure, first and foremost, if your computer doesn't have an SD card reader, invest in one. They make tons of different ones out there. These are a couple that we carry here in the store, but you can find Apple makes one that comes with a little cable. Some computers already have them built into the side there, but just get something that's compact, portable, that's easy to use. I like that little trifecta one. It's almost like a thumb drive stick. Plugs into either USB-C or USB-A, easy to use. There's also the one next to it too, which is really cool because it has a charging hub on the side, so you can plug in a couple different devices and let those charge off the computer if
This
you're
one?
limited.
The ProMaster?
Yeah, this one right now. This one's my personal favorite though. Just
I
for
think
us.
that's what I have, something that looks like that, and I bought these cords for it.
Yeah, that one, sure, because it wouldn't be, this one doesn't
An
need,
extra.
this one doesn't need any cords. I think it's maybe an
That
external
one.
hard drive.
Mm-hmm.
That's a little different though, because it's a card reader, not a hard drive.
Oh, okay.
I'd have to see it. What you
So
got?
does the SD card for the double-sided one, does it go through on the side, or where
Yeah,
is that?
it would go on the side. So it would, just like how these things look, where they have the little slits and slots on there, that's exactly where the SD card would go.
Okay.
So you'd insert it in and you'd be able to tell right away if it doesn't go in the proper way, it just won't push any further. Sometimes you have to flip it and then push it in and then you'll see like it contacting me.
So with that one on the left, you put the card in and the photos go into that box?
It connects to the computer. So you connect all these to the computer,
Yeah.
and this is how then you transfer the photos from the physical SD card onto the computer if your computer doesn't have an SD card slot.
So it's a transfer box, basically.
Yeah.
And you sell them downstairs?
Yeah, we have them downstairs.
Okay, cool.
And how much do they run about?
I'd say anywhere between maybe $30, $20 at the cheapest, all the way up to a couple $100.
Okay.
SD
So does one carry more than another?
Nope, it has nothing to do with how much they carry. All it is a tool for you to transfer from the card into the or into the computer.
Okay.
It's your connection. So the next thing that I recommend to start with is now we're going to actually get the photos off of the card now that we've connected to the computer. We're going to download all that. So I start by copying the photos to a destination folder. When you're on your computer, you can left click and create a new folder. Now, everybody does it a little bit differently. I'm very anal in particular on how I show and keep my photos organized. I organize them by year. When I click on that year, I then have folders for every single month of that year. When I click on that month, I then have the event that I took photos at, or what I was taking photos for, with then the date on there as well too. This way I can easily navigate and find them. If somebody asks me for photos from, let's say, my kid's baseball game, and it was on July 22nd, and he was on the Cubs, and they were playing the Swingers, then I would type in something that would then help me navigate to that folder. Whatever it is that how you want to do it is up to you, but that's just my way of doing it. I go year, then month, and then in each month I have it listed by whatever the event was that I took photos at. And we're going to copy them, not move them. So if we go onto our SD card and we open everything up, we can select the images that we want, and we can then duplicate them and copy them over to the computer. This way, if something does go wrong as we're transferring the photos, if we're moving them, there's a chance we lose them if for any reason the connection gets lost. But if we make a duplicate copy onto the computer, then we're at least ensuring that they're still on the SD card while we're doing this transfer. And then I always recommend that we copy them to another place after this. So if computer is number one, then we want to either do an external hard drive of some sort or cloud-based solutions for photo storage. That could be something like Prime Photos. Amazon Prime has their own photo sharing system where you can save everything there. Google Drive also has it, and everyone's kind of familiar with that. You might get emails that it's full. But both are great examples for what stuff to store images on and use. I like the external hard drive option just because I like tangible devices and I don't want to remember usernames and passwords. But you can do multiple ones too. Some people do 3. I personally just do my computer as my starting point and then my hard drive as my second point.
And this is on B, like for Mac, so you copy it onto Finder or Mac?
Well, Finder is where the photos would pop up, or Explorer would be. So as soon as you put the SD card in, it's either going to be Finder that opens up or Explorer for Windows.
Okay.
And Finder is where you eject it to your.
Yes, well for Mac it's a little different. In Mac, if you just click on the actual SD card, drag it down to the trash can, that is then what opens up eject.
Oh.
Then you can eject it. If you're on a Windows-based computer, you would just left click and hit eject, and then it'll take the card off the computer. By ejecting, it's basically the same thing as you waiting 5 seconds after you turn your camera off. That's ensuring that the card is properly taking the steps it needs to cool down, be done, stop using its application.
Oh.
And that's the next step after
So
this.
for this Prime Photos, Google Photo, is that the same as like iCloud or no?
Yeah, similar. iCloud's just saving the stuff that's on your Mac or Apple products. So on your phone or your laptop or your iPad, these are basically separate apps or services that then you can download those photos to after. So very similar.
Okay.
So again, eject the card before physically removing it. This is simple. Either you're dragging it to the trash can on a MacBook or on an iPad, or if you're on a Windows computer, you're left-clicking, hitting the eject button. This gives it proper time to close its application, so if there's anything it's still finalizing within the transfer, it'll complete that and then properly eject itself, so you don't damage anything on the card, you don't lose anything, but this also then just ensures that it's all gone.
So when you put it in the trash, it doesn't delete everything?
No, no, that's the next part after this. So we can do what's called formatting the card in the camera. Now, I personally like to format after every use. This ensures two things. One, formatting will erase old information on the card. The formatting a card will also prime the card so it's ready for whatever camera you're using. The easiest way to describe that is, let's say that your card that you're using lets you take 4,000 photos. Well, if you don't format the card so it's set for your camera that you have, maybe that 4,000 turns into 3,000 photos instead, because the card isn't basically primed for what your camera's use is going to be, if that makes sense. So if you go to the settings of your camera, you go to the where the memory card section is on the settings, you should see a section for formatting cards or format card. You click on that. By doing that, it'll delete everything that's on the card currently, but it'll make sure that it's primed and ready to go for your
Next time.
Next time, as soon as you download all
So-
the images.
Yeah, so you can't do that to the card if you didn't do it prior.
No, you can do it anytime.
So from that time shooting forward, it would be formatted.
Yes, well, as long as you formatted it to start with. If you didn't, then you can go now and format the card, but be careful because it'll delete everything that you just took.
Oh no.
So you want to make sure you download all that stuff first onto the computer, then format the card, and then delete everything.
And when you say formatted, it's formatted in how you said you do it. You do it from the date, year, that.
Oh, no. All it's, no, this is, that's separate. No, this is what this is doing is that it's making the card primed for your camera so that way it takes the most optimal photos,
Oh,
if that
okay.
makes sense.
Okay, yeah.
So it has nothing to do with how I set my folders and do everything up. That was separate. This is after we're done shooting, we downloaded the images, all the pictures are on our computer or on our cloud-based solution or hard drive. Now we want to erase everything. We can format the card in the camera to erase everything.
Oh, okay.
So you download it to the computer, and then you put it back in the camera, and then you format it?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. You can also, if that's too much, just delete them on the while they're still on the computer. So if the card is inside the computer, you can just select everything on the physical card, drag it to your trash can, and delete that.
In the camera?
On the computer.
Computer.
Oh, I-
So yeah, if the formatting thing was too confusing, you can just delete them while you're still in the computer. Either one. is
So
okay.
I think it asks you, do you want to delete your photos?
No, it shouldn't, because it's a separate thing. You'd actually have to select, especially on a Mac, you'd have to select everything and then just drag it to the trash can when you have the card itself open, if that makes sense.
Yeah. With Nikon, they do it, like by the electronically, they transfer all your pictures,
Yeah, you could do either one.
and then you can format it, right?
Yes. So once you get everything onto the computer, again, this is just talking about the way that when you insert the card into the camera or into the computer, you can format the card once it's back in the camera and you've downloaded everything onto the computer. And then to give images for it to make sense too.
Sorry.
SD card, that's where your photos are starting. Your computer, that's the secondary place that they're going, so you're transferring them into the computer. Once you've got your photos onto your computer, I would recommend one of two solutions. Either download them onto a hard drive or download them into the cloud. You choose which one you're more comfortable with. I personally like the hard drive because it's easier. But if you are good with usernames, passwords, or you've got everything saved on your phone, this is a really easy way for you to share photos with people, save them. If you're doing this for business, you can email them out really quickly. It kind of took the place of like what Dropbox or WeShare should have was kind of like. So
And those you can purchase here too, right? The hard drive.
yeah, hard drives we have in the computer section. I believe Connect is where they mainly keep them. But yeah, these are your options. I do recommend if you've never tried a cloud-based solution, try it. Google Drive is probably the one prime example that everybody's well familiar with. A lot of companies and work use Microsoft, and so if you're using Microsoft Teams, Outlook, or any of that stuff, OneDrive is what you have available there. And if you're looking to get into the creative side and edit and really manipulate your photos more, Adobe Creative Cloud's great too. The only downside with them is you pay monthly subscription fees. But they have all of the apps like Photoshop, Lightroom, InDesign, Premiere Pro. So if you're really trying to edit and become more prolific in that, that's a good option as well too. So before we break down the buttons and we start getting into more of the nitty-gritty parts of this, There are three main types of cameras that you're going to see today: DSLRs, mirrorless, point and shoot, and bridge cameras. Point and shoot and bridge are the same thing. They bridge the gap between basically the DSLR and the mirrorless, and the whole idea behind them is that they're an all-in-one camera with no interchangeable lenses. So the Nikon that you guys have, that would be a point and shoot bridge camera. Next up would be the DSLR technically. That was the most recent camera for years and years. Those are now changed out for the most part. You're going to see most brands getting rid of those for the next few years. Mirrorless is the main and most popular camera that's on the market now, and that's what you two both have in front of you right now. To break those down a little further, point and shoot bridge, pretty self-explanatory, no interchangeable lenses. Now, what makes mirrorless and DSLRs a little bit different? There's a couple different features, but the main thing is the fact that mirrorless do not have a mirror, while DSLRs do. The way the cameras worked, even if you had film cameras back in the day, light cuts through, bounces off the mirror, goes through a pentaprism, and from there we can see it through the optical viewfinder. If you ever shot with a DSLR, even if the camera was turned off, you could look through the viewfinder and still see something in front of you. Whereas with the mirrorless cameras, light is coming in, but it's an electronic viewfinder, so unless this camera's turned on, you're not going to be able to look through the viewfinder at whatever it is you're looking at. With that being said, on the DSLR cameras, mirror would flick up, it would then hit the image sensor in the back, and then that screen that's on the back of your camera is what then would show you what the image looked like. Now with mirrorless, light cuts through, hits the image sensor the entire time, but this then acts as the shutter. Once that opens and closes, now you can still see it on the screen there. So the fact that they got rid of the pentaprism and the mirror makes camera bodies smaller in just the shape and the size, also lighter in general too. So mirrorless has a lot of improvements over its DSLR counterparts. It's better for low light situations, they're faster cameras, they're lighter weight. So if you're brand new to photography and you're debating what camera to get, I strongly would recommend looking at mirrorless. However, there are really good deals on DSLR, so it kind of just depends on what your budget is and what you're looking for. Now, this is going to show a DSLR camera. However, though, DSLRs and mirrorless have very similar button layouts. If not, they're all basically identically the same. So I'm going to go through each one of these buttons, give a little synopsis for what it does. If you want to look at your camera and just kind of see where those are located on there, that might be a good idea. However, if there are any of these buttons you are confused or you don't see them, let me know. A lot of the times, if you don't see a button that's here on your camera, it's in the menu system. So by pressing that info button, the Q button, the FN button, that's how then you get access to whatever these are that you don't see. So to start, video start and stop should be a red circle or red dot on your camera. That one's pretty self-explanatory. If we're on any mode, doesn't matter if it's automatic or full manual or aperture or shutter priority, if we press that red circle, it's going to start recording video. If we press it again, it'll stop the video. The power switch should be somewhere around there too. And typically the power switch is around our shutter release or trigger button. Flicking that one way or the other will turn the camera on and off. And that shutter release button is going to be the way that we take a photo. If we do a half squeeze on the trigger, it's going to give us our focus ability. That's where we'll either see red dots or blue dots or green squares. Something will pop up to show that the camera's locking in and focusing on whatever target it is we're looking at. If we give that a full squeeze, now we're actually taking the picture. We should hear the click on the inside of the camera. There should be a little button on the one side. It'll be a black and white square with a plus and a minus symbol in there, and that's exposure compensation. What exposure compensation does for your photo is it makes the entire image darker or lighter. The easiest way to describe it is if you ever shot with film and you would hold film to light, the longer you hold it to light, the more exposed it becomes, so the more washed out the image starts to look. The less amount of time you show it in the light, the darker the image is still. So if you're shooting somewhere and you're having difficulty getting more light into the camera, let's say you're in a room like this where we really only have a few lights there, it's kind of dim in here, you might want to turn the exposure up on the picture to make it lighter on the frame to help with that darkness that you're seeing.
And how do you go up and down on the little button?
On that button, usually once you press it, it'll then tell you to use the command dial. So there's usually two dials on the camera, one on the back and one on the front. And some cameras will only have one on the back or just the one on the front. Once you press that, you can then turn this dial in one direction or the other.
Okay.
You should then see the number go up or down based on that. Usually it's like a -1 and then a +1. The plus side will then make it lighter, the negative side will make it darker.
Thank you.
And if you don't see that button on the front of your camera, look for a Q or an FN button, those or an I button. Those usually then take you into the camera's quick menu changes, and that's where then you can raise the exposure and not. Now the other thing to keep in mind too is that when we're on automatic, a lot of these features might not be available to us. And the only reason being is because they want to keep the camera as simple as possible for the beginning users. So if you're getting nervous, you're like, I don't understand why none of these are working for me, it's not you, it's most likely the setting that you're on. But, and I have another slide that'll say it, stick with automatic for right now. Next one you're going to see is then the live view switch. Now this is really just a DSLR button. That switch basically, when you pull the trigger on that, would switch between you seeing only pictures in the viewfinder and also seeing something on the screen. Now, if you see there should be a display button on your camera or info on the camera, by pressing on the info or the display button, that's going to trigger between you just being able to view between the viewfinder or you being able to look at the screen. The mode dial, which I skipped over, that's going to be your gear shift. So just like a car, that's your way to go park, drive, neutral, and reverse. That's the same idea with this. That's the main thing that's dictating to your camera what setting or what choice of function you want to be on. For now, we're starting with automatic. And then the command dial, I talked a little bit about that. If you're using something like exposure compensation, that's your way to turn and change through that. If, let's say, you're doing aperture priority mode, if you don't have an aperture ring on the camera lens here, then you'll be able to use the command dial for that. And if you're doing shutter priority, that's where the command dial will be used for that. So that's more for advanced or more intermediate classes. We'll be talking about that next week in full detail on how to use aperture, shutter, manual. For now though, I think I have it on the next one. Start with auto. It's silly to say, but these cameras are extremely intelligent. They're really great. The technology has improved over the years tremendously. So trying to overwhelm yourself with learning full manual is a lot. So stick with the automatic. Camera really does know what's best. As you start using automatic, you'll see its limitations. And that's where then make either mental notes or jot stuff down and basically remind yourself, okay, if this is what I want to get and my camera's not letting me do it, then I need to learn how to use the other modes from there. But it's a good way to just get images taken, it takes clean pictures, and then we can always edit those after the fact too.
Can you use the speed when it's in auto?
No, nothing gets nothing for that. If you
So-
want it, go ahead.
So if people use it just on automatic, then so what is it good for to do manual?
Well, because manual gives you full control over it. You get to really dictate exactly what you want, how much light is coming in, the speed at which it's closing, the aperture, your background to foreground separation, what your white balance is on the camera, what your light metering mode is.
So automatic doesn't have, so it automatically doesn't do that for you?
Automatically, yes, it does do that. However, though, if you want the photo to be a certain way, a certain darkness or sharpness or any of that, that's where manual comes into play. You get to really customize and make the photo look as perfect or whichever way you want it to be.
So when I was taking a picture of like the sunset and the sky was all like orange and pink, and like I took a picture on my phone and it was a lot more colorful than it was when I was doing auto here. Is
Yes.
that where you would change like the exposure?
Exposure would help.
Okay.
ISO could help in that case too. Aperture probably not so much, but ISO and exposure. So lowering down ISO, lowering down the exposure to make it a little darker, to get less light in because you already have so much light happening in front of you. Yes.
Okay.
And that's another reason why manual would be great, or just getting off of the automatic, because then you get to customize those little things.
So when you're in manual, you have to go into each setting
100%.
to change all
Yep,
of that.
you change everything on the fly. So that's how most professional photographers will do it once they have a good understanding of it, because that's where you really get to customize. Like when I shoot, I only shoot manual. I haven't touched auto in years. However, though, the cameras are so smart nowadays that automatic does a really great job if you, depending on what you're shooting at. When you're shooting something like the sky, which could be a little more complicated because of how much light is radiating from the sky, even if it's just the moon, the amount of light the moon puts out is a lot, which can kind of not overload the camera, but the camera doesn't necessarily know. Camera acts dumb once you put a lot of light in front of it. That's the easiest way I can put it. However, though, that's where then graduating from automatic will help a lot. But we should start there.
So if you're doing portrait, just say you've been doing photography for a long time, you're shooting portrait, just people. In manual, what would you change a lot?
Aperture, and then going to be my ISO for the most part. Depending on how much light I have coming in, depending if I'm in a studio or if I'm outside or if I'm in someone's house, lighting is going to become affected. I look at what type of lighting do I have. Is it canned? Is it recessed? Is it incandescent? Is it iridescent? What am I actually getting out of that and how I adjust the camera? I'll switch light metering mode. I'll switch my white balance on there. I'll then take a look at my aperture and make sure that that's giving me good background to foreground separation. But if the client wants to get something that their house or something in the background is there, then I'll focus on that too. Shutter speed is probably the least important thing in there, but depending on where all my other settings are, I might have to readjust shutter to make sure that I'm not closing it too fast to let more light in or to let less light in. So it's those things, though, you can't learn those. You can understand what they are, but really learning to shoot in full manual comes from trial and error. You go for a walk, you bring your camera with you, you just take random pictures of stuff. You start to then evaluate on the little screen there of like, okay, well this photo's too dark, but this one was perfect. I'm on automatic, so what did my camera decide if I wanted to do there? And then from there, like mental notes of that. So that's how I started to learn when I was doing it. Obviously, I also had schooling for it too, but that was kind of the basis for how you get better. It's just practice, and then learn from that.
And what about when you're doing manual and you use your flash? Does that work too?
Yeah, no, so there's two different modes with the flash, depends. That's TTL or then you controlling it. Through the lens makes the flash automatic, so that way it's just shooting as you're changing settings. But then you can manipulate the flash to be fully manual, where then you're typing in what the shutter speed is going to be and what the intensity of the flash is going to be, and if you're bouncing that or not. This, though, I just put on there to show mode dial will look different no matter what camera you have. I shoot on 3 different cameras when I'm out. My mode dial looks different on each one, but every single one of them has a green automatic, an AI, an auto button, an A with a little plus symbol on there. So again, while everything looks different, it's kind of similar to Samsung and Apple when you have the 2 different phones. They might look different and act a little different, but at the very core of them, they do the same thing.
I'm going to ask you a dumb question. I forgot. Aperture and shutter priority. When you put on one of those, what is that again?
Aperture priority, and it might actually be on the next slide.
Okay. Sorry.
Aperture priority is just control over the aperture. Shutter priority is just control over the shutter.
The usual one.
Yep. So you manipulate only those 2 sections.
So if you put aperture priority, you're controlling the aperture.
And if you do shutter priority, you're just controlling the shutter.
Thank you.
So, and that we'll talk more with next week on how to use those. I always like to start with the very basic class. We start with auto. Auto is auto control over settings and functions of the camera. You're not doing anything, the camera's doing it for you. Manual, or M, is full control over the camera's arrays of functions. So you can set it to as complicated as you want. However, you can also dumb it down, but it doesn't help if you don't have a good understanding through automatic.
So if you put it on manual, you're controlling the aperture and shutter.
You're controlling everything.
Okay.
A or AV is the aperture priority control. S or TV is shutter priority control. P, which is the other automatic that's on your camera, is program auto. And aperture and shutter speeds are at auto, but everything else is interchangeable. So if you've become comfortable with automatic and it makes more sense, switching to the P on your camera's mode dial there will now give you control over the ability to change your focusing parameters, your exposure compensation, your light metering, your white balance, everything that isn't necessarily directly correlated to the aperture or the shutter.
So which is, it will help you to move up to manual, right?
Yeah, it will,
So-
absolutely. It's the next step from auto down, is once you get comfortable with how the camera is operating and you can kind of navigate it a little bit better, I usually tell people switch over to program at some point, become more familiar with changing things, and change settings just to try them out and see if how they act. The only way you learn kind of what they do and how they differ from one another is by experimenting and trying them. What I like to do, especially when I'm first getting a camera or I'm first getting a lens, is I'll set a still life up. It could just be a bowl with fruit in it, a water bottle, maybe something that's reflective, something that's matte, just to give me different lighting parameters. I'll then take maybe a flashlight, or I have little cube lights for my camera. I'll set them up, and I'll take pictures on the camera and change one setting at a time and just kind of digest that. Do I do it all the time? No, but if I'm, especially right now, I'm in the process of buying a $2,200 lens, I'm gonna do that process to make sure I fully understand how this lens works before then someone hires me to come out and take photos for them. So little things like that are good ways to get better at it. But program's great because if you can understand auto, now things are changeable, but the main bread and butter of the camera, adjusting how much light is coming in and how fast it's closing, that the camera's still gonna control. But now you get to have a little bit more creative freedom on it, which is really nice. B is the last one on there, which is on some of them, isn't on some of them, but the camera's fully customizable, but as long as you're holding down that shutter release, the camera's gonna stay open. If you're interested in astrophotography or long exposure photography, that's where B is really awesome. So this is what you'll see when people put their camera up and they take beautiful pictures of the Milky Way galaxy and the night sky. They're using some form of B or bulb setting, is what that stands for. If you don't have a B on there, then basically you'd go into the camera either full manual or shutter priority, and then you'd be able to keep it open for a long exposure period of time. Long exposure could be multiple seconds, it can be 30 seconds, I've even seen people keep it open for a minute. The biggest thing to keep in mind with that is that a tripod is absolutely critical and necessary. If you have any shake on a camera while doing long exposure, you've lost the image completely, so keep that in mind. Scenes mode, most cameras won't have this anymore. I keep this on because I still get DSLR customers. If you see scenes on there, they're automatic modes, but they're just specified. Some, like the headshot is a portrait. The sky is gonna be like outdoors or nature photography. The flower that's really close up is macro photography. The running person is for sports or activity, and then the little night sky or white square with a star in the background is for dark nighttime flash. So you don't see these much anymore because for the most part they were kind of redundant. Everything is just automatic and letting the camera do its thing. But if you have a camera that does have them on there, they're on there just to help you kind of navigate and give you something a little bit easier.
So I have a question. So if you had a camera on here, I mean, if you have it on automatic, but you want more flash, or I mean, it already has flash on there.
Well,
so if you add a light to here, will it automatically?
There's no flash on your camera.
No.
No. You
So
don't-
there's no automatic flash built in it.
No.
Oh.
No, they got rid of that just because you have a really powerful camera that can do well for low light photography. So unless you're, like for example, I get promoters who come in that want to get cameras to take pictures at nightclubs or very dark venues, then they want flash.
So then I have to buy one to
Exactly.
add. Oh,
But for the most part, unless you're taking pictures in extreme darkness, a flash probably isn't going to be necessary. And if you do feel like one's necessary, you'll learn over time. And they sell different models where it's like you can get an entry level model for a couple $100 all the way up to one that costs I think $700 or $800. So
So are those the new Z cameras?
that is a Canon. So that would be the EOS R6.
So if you wanna shoot night with that camera, you need a flash?
Not necessarily. No. I mean, with nighttime, these things do really well in low light performance. That's the whole point. Yeah. Sony, Nikon, Canon, they all are working on or really push the mirrorless technology to do well for low light. So it's a big thing. Sony's #1 in low light performance right now.
But I took pictures in a hall, like at a wedding, in like a reception hall. It wasn't dark, but the pictures didn't look nice.
Were they on automatic still?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's your answer. So we have to not only just be good at automatic, but then we have to realize how to use them, the rest of the features on the camera, in order to then get better with it.
So moving from automatic to performance training.
Yep, to the P. Yep, move it over to the P setting, and then from there you can control ISO. ISO, you can turn that up, which then makes your camera more sensitive for light. When I played with your camera, you also had it set to 500 ISO, which should be at automatic ISO instead, which will help tremendously for indoor photography, because as light changes and differs, then the camera will read that light and give you more light on your subjects. So it's little things like that.
So much to learn.
It's kind of complicated. Cameras aren't the easiest thing, but once you can get the hang of it and just practice, that's where it's really beneficial. If you just pick up the camera and you're like, okay, I gotta go to an event today, and you haven't had time to train with it or work on it, that's where it can be daunting, and exactly what you experienced, where then the trigger was going off and the timer was on and you didn't know how to turn that off. They can frustrate, and it's like, why do I do this?
Right.
So I get it. Go back through it. So some cameras on the side will have a flash button. Most of yours don't have it. You actually might have a flash button on the P. Is that a 1000 or 950?
Good question. You tell me.
I can't see from here, but it's one of the two. It's a P9000 or a P950.
Yeah.
There should be a little trigger on there to pull the flash
Looks
up.
like it. Looks
Yeah.
like it.
From there, you'll pop the flash up. You can then use it if your camera has this button on the side.
So that's to pull the flash out.
If it has one.
If it has one.
Yes. FN is your function button. That's very similar to an I button, a Q button. The FN is basically your function button. It can have an array of different features or things on there. When you press on it, your camera should then tell you on the body what it does. It could be something like your light metering area, it could be white balance. Some people customize them too, which you can do in the menu system of the camera. You can make it so it connects to your phone easier. Basically, it's a quick note button, if that makes sense. Some cameras have them, some don't. Others will just have all the buttons that you need to click and press. Some will have an FN located in a few different spots.
Is that my MFN? This guy?
Yes, that'll be one of the FN buttons.
Okay.
So either it's fully customizable or it's set to a certain thing that then you can control and play with. Zoom ring is on the lens. If you have a lens that is a telephoto lens, using that zoom ring to go back and forth is how then you go from a wide angle to a tighter angle. If you don't, like on that one, instead you'll have a W and a T. That then helps you go wide or tight. Focus ring is on the front from there. If you're not using automatic focus and you're using manual focus, you will turn this ring in order to get your image or whatever it is into focus. If you're shooting photos, stick with automatic focus. It does a really great job, it locks in, just takes a little bit to get used to, and if you need to change how it's focusing and what the parameters for that is, then it's going to be under the P section where then you can change so you don't get all those tiny little squares. If you're shooting a lot of video, I would recommend trying to learn manual focus. My best example is if you're shooting video and you have the camera set up this way, maybe you're doing some form of interview, things are cutting across in front of you. If you're on automatic focus, the way these cameras work is that it's going to focus on what's in front of it. So if you're focused on something further away, somebody cuts through on you, then the camera's going to readjust and try to focus on what walked past before then it goes back to what you were on. So it can ruin your video, it can be a pain in the butt. So if you're shooting video, I would recommend learning how to use manual. If you're shooting just photos, stick with automatic. It's totally fine. Some lenses that are larger or maybe are more prone to opening up will have a lens retract button. If you don't have one of those, don't worry about it. But basically what that is if let's say you're traveling, they've dictated, the companies that made your lens, that the lens is more prone to opening. So if you're traveling, the horror story that I have is I was out once, forgot to make sure I clicked in all the way on my lens retract button. It opened up in my bag, and the way I put my bag down, it snapped the lens in half on me. If you have that button, definitely use it. If you don't worry about it. Your lens is stronger than that. Lens release button. That's your way of taking them on and off if you have a mirrorless or DSLR camera. You guys don't have to worry about that, but for you guys, if you hold down on that button and turn clockwise, that'll remove the lens. And if you put the lens back on and you match them up dots to dots, and then turn to the left, yes, to the left counterclockwise, you'll hear a click. Once you hear that click, that's how you know that the lens is locked into place properly. Each lens has their own bayonet system, and it's strongly recommended that you use the lenses that are designed for your camera. They make adapters out there for you to move lenses from one camera body to another, and you can try that out. I strongly recommend against it. It's like having a car and putting on all these parts that the manufacturer didn't make. Sometimes it's not reliable after a certain point. So try to just put the lenses that are made for your camera on the camera body.
When changing the lens, it should be turned off?
I would absolutely turn it off. Yeah, because a lot of the times what happens is when you turn the camera off, the camera will do a sensor cleaning where it just kind of manually makes sure no dust or nothing gets on the sensor. The sensor is the most valuable part of the physical camera body. Your glass is the most valuable part of your whole camera system. Invest in the glass, the body will eventually deteriorate. Big thing to keep in mind, yeah, turn the camera off, take the lens off. I like to try to keep the camera body upside down too, so that way dust and particles can't get onto the sensor, because then that's where you'll see spots on your photo and it just won't look right.
When you buy cameras from the DSLR to one of these Z cameras, you have to buy the adapter to use the lens, right?
So yes, if you have one of these older DSLR model cameras, you can bring the lenses over from one camera body to the other, but you gotta get the adapter for it. So if you're shooting Nikon and you've got the D50-600 and you wanna buy the new Z series, then yes, you can bring those lenses over. If you're shooting Canon and you have the old EF mounts, then you can bring those old EF mounts over for the new mirrorless cameras. Hi there, welcome in.
Sorry.
You're good, have a seat wherever.
Is there anything wrong with like having the lens cap on and turning it on and off? No. Okay.
No, it's totally fine. Having the lens cap on is nice too, just because then at least you're protecting the front of your lens. The other thing that you could probably invest into if you don't want to do all that is a lens filter. Filter goes right on the front. You get a standard UV filter. It's a glass filter. That'll protect too for scratches or nicks, or if you drop it on accident. I had a mom who came in once. She was taking pictures at a hockey game, and she literally dropped her $3,000 lens on the floor. She thought it was completely fried, but luckily it was the actual lens filter that broke. So she was
Yeah, the
safe.
filter stays in line.
Yeah.
That's the I have, right? Yeah.
Yes, I believe so.
I have a question.
What you got?
Okay, with our cameras on automatic, because we don't know how to use it.
Yeah.
If we wanna zoom in and out, we need to do that, the camera's on.
Yes, you need to do that.
Where is it on our camera?
On that one, it's that W and the T button.
Yeah, I got it.
Oh, you know, okay.
Yeah.
So you have two options with this. When you're using this guy, you can use this side here, which is really nice. But you also have it in the front there.
Oh, you want to do
So
that.
as you're playing with it, yeah. The camera never will. I mean, some older models did. However, just given that you might want to be more tight or you might want to be more wide, that's more of a use. So then you just kind of go from that.
And mine is here, right?
Yes,
And,
yours is on the front there. Because they have an all-in-one camera, the Bridge, where you have a camera where you can interchange the lenses. So for the most part, they're always going to be on that front part there. Lens release, drive mode button. This is what we got stuck on with your camera. So the drive mode button should be symbolized somewhere within the camera body of a stack of squares and a timer. What that does is it allows you to switch what's called the drive mode. And so the drive mode can be distinguished as, are you taking a single photo? Are you taking 10 photos in a second? Are you setting a timer on for your camera? If so, is it 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds? That's what the drive mode does. But for the most part, if you're just doing still photography, keep it on the one square. If let's say you're doing action photography, you're going to a game and there's going to be people running back and forth, doing the burst photography, that's where you hear those professional photographers and do that as they're going. That's what they're switching. They're putting it on burst so that way they can take 10, 14 pictures in 1 second. Now when we flip to the other side of the camera, the menu button, pretty self-explanatory. Any menu system changes, time or date, formatting your SD card. Maybe you don't like what one of the function buttons do. That's where you can change all of that stuff. If you want to adjust the brightness of your screen or change the volume on the camera, or maybe just learn a little bit more about certain things. I know Canon's really good for that. That's why they have an info button on there too. Yeah.
So what you just changed in mine, did you have to go to menu?
No.
Menu?
Well, yes and no. For yours, I did because you're still on the automatic setting, so I could change that real fast. I'd go to menu. But if you're on anything else, you can just press that, I think it's the Q button.
Q button,
You press the Q button and then that quick menu will pop up with all the little changes you can make.
Okay.
Diameter adjustment, if you're someone who's using the viewfinder, like myself, I wear glasses. When I'm shooting though, I have two options. A lot of people will kick their glasses up so that way they have contact with the little rubber piece that's on there. That'll help create a seal on the eye so that you can see through with no light interference breaking through. If I decide to do it with my glasses on, then I might get some light coming around. But this diameter adjustment is the same thing like when you go to the eye doctor and they say A or B. 1 or 2. The diameter adjustment as you turn the wheel one way or the other will make the image in the viewfinder look clearer or more blurry. So if you're gonna switch between wearing glasses or not, like I can't see anything if I don't have them on, that's why typically I only use my viewfinder when I have contacts on, or if it's not very bright and I don't have to worry about light cutting through my lens. If you're gonna use it without, then just be ready to adjust and adapt.
So you, because you wear glasses, you like using the screen?
I typically use the viewfinder more than anything. It depends on what I'm doing, but if I am wearing my glasses and it's an extremely bright day, then I'll probably just use the screen. But I do really like.
I just seen this thing that you suck to the back of the screen, and it's like a magnifying
Right.
glass to
To
look
help.
at the screen.
Interesting. I've never seen that before. Never shown me that. That's cool. They make tons of weird accessories. There's also pieces too that you can get for the eyepiece, where literally it's like a giant like screen that goes over, so it blocks both eyes as you're looking through.
Oh, wow.
People get real crazy with their camera stuff. You can go as intense or as minor as you want with it. This is probably the most expensive hobby that you'll get into if you really get into it. Info button, that's on the side there. Info button could explain to you what the shortcut or the menu system does. It can explain maybe what's going on for the camera and how it works. I actually really like the menu button or info button for one reason. After I've taken my pictures, I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit. If I've taken a couple photos and automatic, and I press the playback button, I can obviously see what images I've taken. I can then use my multi-selector to scroll in between those images. And let's say I find an image that just was really great, it looked fantastic, I want to know what I did. If I press the info button, that'll tell me what my aperture was, what my shutter was, what the ISO was, what the light compensation was, what the white balance was, what the light metering mode was. That breaks down all of the little metrics of the physical photo, so that way it's an educational tool, if you will. It helps you kind of understand what your camera did to take such a photo, and automatically kind of give you a quick recap of it. It can also get even more intense and show you what a histogram is, which I'm not going to bore you with that today, that's next week, but it can really give you a lot of information. So again, playback, keep scrolling until you find a photo that you like, hit the info button, it should break all that stuff down for you.
You have to hit the info once you get on the picture that you do like.
Yep. If you press it once, it should keep that screen up too. So like as you scroll, it'll be like all this text and information, and in the left corner, it'll be the photo real small. That's why I would recommend scroll until you find the photo you like, then hit the info button, and then look to see what they have. Focus and exposure lock. So on the very back, some of these cameras will have an AE-L, a F-L button. That is very similar to when you use your finger to do a half click on the trigger to focus on the subject matter. You can basically just hold on to that and take photos. If you hold on to it long enough, it should lock into place depending on what menu settings you have. Where that's great is, let's say, I had a woman who came in who wanted to help with taking product photography. She was helping her friend with her restaurant to take photos of like food. And so what they ended up doing was they set their tripod up, had their lighting set up on the food they wanted to take pictures. They had a little X on a table like, made out of tape, and they would just basically move the piece of food there that they wanted to take a picture of. They made sure that what their settings were for light and for focus and everything else was automatically set. They'd take the picture, look at it, look good, move that plate out, slide the next plate over. They didn't have to readjust the camera, they didn't have to keep focusing in on the items. They were able to use this button to just lock into their target and just constantly keep moving stuff over.
So is mine literally the one just that says lock?
Yep.
Okay.
Let me come over on that side. My glasses are different.
Because I have this AF on.
That's the one.
This
AF.
one?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
This one right here?
That's your lock button that's similar to what she has on there. That's something exclusive to Canon. I have to triple check. This button right there though, the
Okay.
AF on. Image playback we already talked about. I button. So I've been saying them a bunch. I, Q, FN, they're all similar function control buttons where if you're on one of the other menu systems, like not automatic, but you're on program, or you're on manual, or on aperture shutter, pressing the I button will then pull up your shortcut menu to change things on there. So now you can change things like your white balance, or your focus parameter, or who you're targeting, that sort of thing. The OK button, pretty self-explanatory, that's the enter button. Multi-selector we talked about. Demagnify and magnify button, this is a great tool to use on your camera if you have it. Basically what that does is it'll help you zoom into an image, and you can check to see how crisp some parts of the photo are. It's really helpful, especially if you're taking portraits and you're like, okay, did I get is this perfect? Am I sharp on my edges, everything? Magnify in to see how sharp it is when you zoom into a certain point. If you try zooming in too far, it'll automatically get blurry. There's no way past that. But usually when you hit the magnify button, it'll bring the camera into the appropriate zoom length just to see like how crisp everything is. Then you can use the multi-selector and just move around the image, check how crisp it is, and then demagnify to get out of that.
So do that during you shooting it?
No, it's like after.
After you-
Now you're looking at the pictures, you hit the playback button, you find an image you like, you're like, oh, okay, is it really sharp? Then magnify and take a look.
Okay,
Then if you don't like a photo, delete.
delete it.
And that should really be the back of the camera. That should be all the buttons that are on there. Now there might be some that aren't on there, some buttons that are on there. Those I can help answer for you as best as I can after. But this is probably the most amount of buttons that you'll see on every system of camera.
You could replay this too on what you missed on the YouTube.
I'll make sure you have that card. I think you already have that card. Just scan the QR code on there and everything's already on there. Now, this is a photo a customer sent me and I really liked it, so I put it on here. My camera doesn't work and she was not happy. Well, we really went through it and figured out that it was, and I hate to use that analogy, but sometimes it's not the baseball bat, it's the baseball player. Her camera was perfectly fine. It was just the settings that she was using and using it on full manual before she really could understand how to do it. Just play with the camera, digest it, practice with it. That's the biggest thing that you can do. Again, if you just kind of leave it, don't touch it for a while, and pick it up randomly, this might happen. Your camera isn't a smartphone, and that's a really important thing to say. You experience that when trying to take a picture of the sunset. When you get a phone, they really make it super intuitive for you to get a sharp photo, a quick photo, without really even blinking or thinking about it. But the problem is that at a certain point, you start to notice that the quality isn't quite there. It looks distorted in certain areas. The photo just doesn't pop the same way that some other cameras do. That's where then your camera can do everything your phone can. It's just you need to learn how to control that portion or feature on there and learn how to set it. Once you can learn how to do that, then it blows the phone out in comparison. Biggest thing though is that the phone companies are smart. They know that people don't want to do that, and so they make it so easy and intuitive to take a photo. So nothing against your phone. I also have a 15. I have one of the best cameras, but it's one of those things where once you start to really get into photography, you'll really notice the difference. This is silly, but before we talk about lenses, I always like to show this, holding the camera. Biggest pain that artists, actors, photography people can get into are arthritis or carpal tunnel. So just make sure that you're keeping your back straight when you're shooting. It's similar to like when you pick stuff up, never pick up with your back, use your legs and your knees to pick things up. When you're holding a camera, try not to, you're not a bird, that's the easiest way to describe it. Don't flap your wings, keep them nice and tucked. I think of like the porch on the side of your house. You have support beams that run into the house itself. That's what your arm should be. You're using the camera to hold up, tucking in your elbows. Also too, if let's say you're on vacation and you're in a crowded spot, if you have your elbows up, someone can bump into you, you drop the camera, oh no. So keep the elbows down, keep them to your side, keep your back nice and straight. And remember that one hand is meant to go on the side of the camera, the other is meant to go on the lens. Now again, you can do that in two different ways. I've seen people that hold it more like this gentleman where he's got more of his palm on the back end of the camera. Whatever's easiest for you, but keep that shape. I think that's the easiest way. You've got the grip, and you've got your hand on the bottom for your support. Elbows are tucked in when you're shooting. And obviously, we're not perfect, so you're going to bend over to take photos, but if you can, to save your back, just dip a little bit lower to get the shot. Also, most cameras have screens that pop out. You can articulate that screen too to make it so it's angled up towards you, and then you can just hold the whole camera down lower to take the shot too. That's what the screen's there for.
I'm scared to not put my strap around my neck. I'm like, if I drop this, I'd be so pissed.
Definitely put the strap around it. It keeps it safe. That's why it's there. silly, but focus, then shoot, and shoot through the whole picture. I get a lot of people that will just go rapid fire on the camera. They won't sit and take the second to focus in with it. It's not going to do you any good. Take a second, hold the focus down, hold the exposure lock on the back of the camera down. Whatever it is you're using to make sure that you get the boxes and everything to pop up on the screen, and shoot through the entirety of the photo. If, let's say, we're looking through the window and we just want to take a picture of the TV that's spinning over there, that's great. But let's keep in mind too that there's a lot else going around there that we need to remember that's going to show up in the photo. If we're cropping that out, it's a different story, but even then we want to make sure that what we're taking a photo of is sharp, detail oriented, and that we've seen the whole picture, if that makes sense.
But if we're in automatic, we don't have to, do we still have to do that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Do we still have to push the focus and,
Yeah. So
okay.
you still always do a half click and then
a
click
click
through. Yeah. Because the camera automatically focuses, but it's similar to like your phone. A lot of people will just hold the phone up and click, and the photos are blurry, they don't look right. But if you take the second to hold the phone up, attach the screen, make sure it focuses in on what it is, and then hit the button, get a
Then
better
you get
picture.
that, yeah.
Same idea with the camera. Half squeeze on the trigger, get the boxes to appear, then full squeeze to actually take the picture. If you or the camera are moving, you will get blurry photos. There are a lot of artists that made very amazing careers out of taking blurry photos. We are not them. We are trying to take a good, clean, crisp photo. So before you start to try to turn into an avant-garde photographer, just relax yourself, don't move, take pictures, and it won't be blurry if you're not moving. If you still are experiencing blurry images, there's settings and different things that we can play with to help with that. But if it comes down to it and it still doesn't look right, looking into a tripod or a monopod might be a great option too. Monopods are lightweight. You can use them as a walking stick if really needed to, but great if you don't want to carry a big bulky tripod. Date your body, mirror your glass. So this is probably the most important thing that I can bestow onto you guys. Your glass is the most valuable portion of your camera. If you take great care of your glass, there's a good chance that 5-6 years down the road you want to sell your lens, you can make most of the money back on it. The lenses really don't go bad unless they're beat up, destroyed, scratched to high heavens, so take good care of that. Your camera body, though, as a whole, probably only has a good 10 years, 8 years, depending on usage. There is what's called a shutter count on everyone's cameras. That's basically the mileage on your car. If you get to a certain point with your car, 100,000, 200,000 miles, car starts to really go down the drain. Camera does the same thing. It leaks light, doesn't focus properly, has a hard time focusing or turning on, doesn't load images fast enough anymore, doesn't take images fast enough anymore. That's just age and depreciation of the camera. Invest in the glass, your body, always put whatever you can into the body, but keep that in mind when you're buying a camera.
So you can't get your camera can't be like send it to Canon and get it like calibrated or
You
anything.
can, but I mean that's not going to change the shutter count. It's the same thing if you take.
And how do you look at the shutter count? Is that on manual?
It depends. So certain brands let you do it. I know with Sony and Nikon and Leica that I shoot on, Leica has a section in the menu where I can see it. Sony, you have to plug the camera into the computer and run a program. Nikon, I want to say is on the camera body. I haven't checked itself. I don't know with Canon. I'd have to triple check. But it should be in the menu system for Canon. But it's the same thing. If you take your car into the shop to get it fixed, that doesn't remove the miles that you already put on it.
Right.
That just cleans it up. So understanding focal length and zoom before we talk a little bit about lenses, and then I'll open it up for just any questions that anybody has. When we look at lenses, we can equate focal length and zoom as the same thing. The idea that we're going to bring into this is that as we zoom, not only do we bring the one thing that we want closer, but we bring the entirety of the image closer. So we're really not necessarily getting something closer, we're getting our view tighter and tighter and tighter, which then causes the lens to then zoom in. So at 70 millimeters, we can really see everything that's going on in this. We can see we're in a swampy, marshy area, what looks to be mountains in the background, greenery, and then a town that's kind of peeking out from the tops. The birds are in the center, and as we zoom in, we slowly but surely bring all of that closer. Now there's more definition that's coming up on the mountains. The town is now looking a little bit smaller, but we can see the tops of the buildings still. The greenery is closer, and And all that excess negative dead space that we had around the image is now going away. As we then get to 400, we really just have birds in focus, a building. Maybe we could tell that those are mountains, maybe we would think they're sprawling hills at this point, and then we have our greenery. So focal length and zoom are the same idea. Zoom is not necessarily us zooming into something as much more as it is making the image tighter and tighter on our subject matter.
Hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, all good. Appreciate you guys
Take
coming in.
private lessons too?
I don't teach any private, but come any day that I'm here. I'm off Tuesday, Wednesdays. Just bring the camera in. We'll sit down and talk about it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Of course. Focal length also leads into compression though, and this is important for a portrait photographer to keep in mind. The smaller the number is, the wider the angle is. When it comes to people, subject matters, or anything else, the tighter they can start to look. So you can see that when you get to that 16 and 24, how his nose pops out, his face turns like into a pinhead. It just doesn't look right.
Mm-hmm.
But then you get into something like the 200, and you really can see that his cheeks become very fat, large. They're more sunken in certain areas too. You make them too wide. For portrait photography, for people photography, ideally 35 to about 85 is the spectrum of where your millimeter should be for the lens. So when you're zooming and you're changing things up, you'll see it between 35 to 85. That's a perfect portrait. The human eye sees at a 50 millimeter. And so because of that, the Nifty 50 is considered the most perfect portrait lens that you can get.
What did you say, nifty 50?
Nifty, that's what the joke call it, but it's a 50 millimeter lens. But keep in mind, background's coming closer, our subject matter isn't going anywhere, so we're repositioning ourselves in order to get this image. However, because of that focal length that we have, it can lead to compression of the image, so it's important to keep that in mind. Typically, if you're doing something that's a 16, 20, 24 millimeter, you're doing it for landscape. You're doing it for the wide shot, if you will. If you're getting into anything that's a small number, or like that 50, 35, 85, that's the portrait side. And if you're getting anything past 85, I always joke and say that's the bird flying in the distance. That's your nature photography. That's you trying to get that action shot because you're 200 feet back in the bleachers. That's what that's for.
But what if you are doing a portrait, but you also want some of the landscape?
Like you
you're-
can cut back. I mean, the other thing too to keep in mind is that while it's a zoom lens, you can also move your body. So set it to the 35, the 50, the 85, whatever position you want, and just back yourself up a little bit. Get more of the scenery in there. That's the easiest way to go about it in order to make sure that you're locking in, but then at the same time too, you're not distorting the people around you.
So that millimeter, so it looks like it has something to do with the lens, but I don't really understand the
Yeah.
construction of the lens, but
I'll show you. I have the
what
next-
exactly is it measuring, or
So,
what unit is that?
let's
I don't
see.
know what that millimeter.
so.
Because I hear it so much.
You will.
Right.
It has absolutely nothing to do with measurement at all.
Okay.
Basically, when they were creating the first cameras, whatever scientists and engineers came up with this, they devised a way for where the glass is in a lens. There's usually 3 or 4 different glass components inside a lens. This is more techy than anything, but it's fine. The way it works is that the lenses are set up in such a way where they either are bulging out this direction or they're doing the opposite version, they're inversed. With that being said, as light cuts through, that's what's then dictating the actual millimeter size, if you will, of the lens. The only way I can really describe it is that, for starters, scientists figured out this number. Whoever created the first set of lenses, then it's just been kind of universally adapted that this is the millimeter size. So as a photographer, once you become more experienced with it, you kind of realize what those do. The way I describe it to people, the smaller the number, the more wide of an angle you're going to get. So for landscape photography, for interior photography, for astrophotography, a wide lens is great. Now, if you are a portrait photographer or a street photographer or just kind of an all-purpose, something that goes from that low number to like medium number, and I'll say medium number being 85, 100, and low number being like 35, is that kind of middle spot where if I wanted to take a great picture of the 4 you being here, I would use one of those numbers to get a perfect portrait of yourselves. Then if I get to that 100 and up, that's for the action photography, that's for the distance shooting, that's for the bird photographers or the sports photographers, or just anybody who's looking for distance. So the numbers, the bigger the number, the tighter the shot, the wider the number, or the smaller the number, the wider the shot. Has nothing to do with millimeter sizes or actual measurements, and the only way to quantify those numbers would be to pull up like how they actually set those specs up for the lenses, which I don't even know that. I don't even know that. But that's the way that's the way you'll learn as you keep playing with the cameras. Is that the smaller the number, the wider, the larger the number, the tighter. So these are common lenses that you'll see, and then I'll talk about the lenses that you need, and I always put quotes around that. So to start off, when you're buying a camera, a kit lens is fantastic. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. You get very snobby photographers sometimes who sit and say, you can't have a kit lens, it's a bad lens, but if you're brand new to this and you don't really know what to do, the kit lens is great because it gives you a starting point to jump off of. Like for example, 18 to 55 for this lens would be wide angle to portrait. This number on the top there tells me about the light that it's letting in. The lower this number can go, the better, because the more light it lets in. But for a kit lens, this is going to give me kind of the basis or foundation of what I'm doing. Some kit lenses will be extremely fancy. Like for yours, they gave you an f4, like a 24 to 105. That's a phenomenal lens. And the fact that it has the red line going through it, that's Canon's top of the line lens. So that's a great kit lens. But eventually there are other lenses that are better than that you can maybe trade in for and then get rid of that and get something a little more upgraded. In the same boat, people could trade this lens in to upgrade to something else.
So this lens would be good for what?
It's 24 to 105, so just what we were talking about. Wide angle, portrait, you get a little bit of zoom. It's a perfect all-in-one lens.
But not good for like real estate.
You can. 24 is wide angle. You can get some with it. I mean, for real estate, you probably want like
For like
16 to,
inside.
like a 16 millimeter, 35, like something around there. For real estate, wider angle because you've got buildings that are wide or landscape that's wide, and that's what you want to focus on.
Because this has 50, but when we spoke before, I remember you recommended a different.
There is eventually, when you're ready for it, the 50 millimeter 1.2.
Yeah.
That's the best lens. That's a nifty 50. And for a portrait photographer, it's the difference between water and wine. It's just a very fine lens. However, though, it's a $3,000 lens. So, is it practical? Not maybe right now, but in the future, when you've really got the business behind it and you're ready to invest into it, it's awesome.
Okay.
Yeah, it's hard to quantify with lenses because again, you're gonna see when you start looking at it, there's so many of them, and I can see where it's confusing. Where do you start? That's why I love the kit lens, and I think it's a great starting point. So we move from the kit lens, which in this case it's a variable zoom lens. It's a starting point. Probably comes with your camera. Your camera probably costs you $800, $900 with this thing included.
So kit lens meaning like it came with the camera?
Exactly.
Okay.
Typically a kit lens is not that powerful, but it's good enough that it'll get the job done, and it'll at least teach you either what to look out for, what you like, what you don't like, which I think is the most helpful part. It's a good starting point. This is the Nifty 50. This is what eventually I think for portrait photographers is the main bread and butter. So they call it the Nifty 50 because it's really nifty. The 50 millimeter is considered like the perfect viewing angle of the human eye. And so a 50 millimeter is going to give you a perfect representation of what you're currently seeing right now, which is nice. Thing to keep in mind though is that while we joke and call it the Nifty 50, this style of lens is called a prime lens. Why is it a prime? Because it has one number. So we'll show a telephoto lens after this, but this lens has no zoom. This lens will stay at 50 millimeters the whole time, meaning that if I don't like the angle of my photo when I'm using it, I gotta move. I gotta readjust and figure myself out. But this lens is a 1.4 aperture, which the lower the number, the better the lens. The amount of light this lens lets in, the crispness of this lens, the coating that this lens has gone through from a mechanical side that, again, might seem like mumbo jumbo now, so I won't bore you with it. But the lens is technologically more advanced than your telephoto and then your kit lens. So it's a great, powerful lens that takes a clean image, but it takes the most perfect portrait. When you see pictures of, the only way I can describe it is like when you get these artists that take pictures of people and it's like, let's say an actor or an actress and they just look perfect. The background is completely blurred out, separated. You get beautiful background to foreground separation. They're using something like this.
What's on the top? It says,
It's Canon lens EF 50mm 1 to 1.4.
what's the 1 to 1.4?
That's the aperture. So the aperture can get down to a 1.4.
So how is that different if like I just put mine to 50 and I change like the aperture stuff? Does my camera not go to that aperture?
Won't go to that low.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
your lens will go something more like this, with that 3.5 to 5.6,
Okay.
which is still great. It's great for a kit lens. And
Yeah.
as you start to get more advanced, and you're like, okay, now I'm trying to get this specific shot, and it doesn't let you do it. That's where then you'll realize, okay, then I probably need to think about upgrading.
Okay. And what does that aperture do again that makes it so much better when it's lower?
It's so for aperture. If you ever look at like a lens, or if you think of your human eye, the pupil on the inside, when the black part gets really small and then really big, it's based on light, how much light you're letting into your eye.
Mhm.
The camera acts the same way. So there's metal shutters on the inside that get smaller or bigger. The lower the number, the larger the inside aperture can get, the more light that can come in. And then usually with that, because of how much light comes in, they reduce the amount of distortion that comes from here to here. So for a kit lens, if you take a picture, it might look perfect in the center, then you look off to the side and it's like, that person looks a little off, or like the building looks like the lines don't look the most proper. That's because that's what they do with the kit lens. To save money and cut costs, they give you a sweet spot right in the middle of the lens, but not so much on the sides, because technically the lens doesn't really give,
Okay.
the aperture doesn't give that much, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay.
So the lower the number, the more light comes in.
Yes.
The more expensive the lens is.
100%.
What did the EF mean on there?
That's the mounting system.
Oh,
So for you, your RF, the old lenses were EF. Now you have telephoto zooms. So to show again, there's that little red stripe that you have on your lens. But telephoto zooms are like a telescope. They move in and out. And with that being said, you can hit multiple numbers on there. So like for this lens, for example, it's 24 to 70. This lens over here is 70 to 200. So where the numbers come into play, it's still a little confusing. But 24 to 70, you get wide angle to portrait. 70 to 200, you get a really tight angle, and now you really get to zoom. So if I'm standing here and I want to get all the way across the atrium, but I really want to zoom in on maybe that Dyson fan that's over there, this should help me do it. Whereas this one, if I'm walking around downtown Chicago, and I'm like, oh, okay, this building looks awesome, I could go to 24. But then let's say that there are two people interacting, and I want to take a cool street photography photo, I can zoom into the 50 or 70 and get a really nice picture of them. The flexibility you have with these two lenses are much greater. But on the flip side of that, where on the prime you could get down to a 1.4 aperture, the lowest, even on the most expensive zoom lenses, are 2.8. Very small difference, but if you've been doing this for long enough and you really get into the photography side of things and you just understand how that mechanic works, you'll notice the difference. I personally am after a 24 to 70, the new one that Sony came out with. I really want it. It's a 2.8. It's a great lens, but it's one thing I have to keep in mind when I'm using it is that I won't let a lot of light into it. And is it going to be the perfect portrait lens? No, but is it the perfect walking around, street photography, sightseeing lens? If I'm going to an event or I'm doing something that I'm not really focused on just portrait cuts of people, I want to try to get something that's more, people interacting with each other, and like event photography, for example, where you've got people kind of mingling at tables, but then you have someone who's about to give a speech. This would be a great lens for that because I can do groups, but then I can get a nice portrait out of it. He says a portrait is nice as my 50mm would be, not necessarily, but it's still going to be a clean, crisp image. So depending on the situation you're in, that might dictate what lens that you bring with you when you go out, but that also could dictate too if you bring both lenses with you or just one. That's a conundrum that really only you can figure out as you go.
In general, when you say portrait, do you mean by like
It It could be
middle and up, or just a full body?
full body, I mean, it could really be anything. I could consider if I'm just taking a picture of this laptop a portrait, because I'm just taking a picture of the one item.
Oh.
I typically refer to portraits as just anything that's a still photography
Oh,
of something
okay.
else. Versus like, you know, if I wanted to take a portrait of you, I could maybe just cut it so that way it's just the top. Maybe I'd pull myself back and now I'm just getting you in the shot. But then maybe I'd pull even further back and I get everybody in the shot.
Oh, okay.
That's not then a portrait, that would be more of just maybe lifestyle, event, you could have different names for it.
Oh, okay.
But
But a
typically-
portrait could be more than, because you do, some portraits that I do is just like a family,
yeah, absolutely, yeah, that could work.
but you have to still pull back and,
Yeah, but in this case, I mean, we're not set up in any way that I think that it would be like a portrait shot. It's more of just everyone sitting
Sitting
down.
there.
Yeah, exactly. It's more of a casual picture. Not landscape, but you kind of get my drift for what I'm going at with that.
Okay, I thought it has like something to do with the closeness.
I think of the way of closeness of it. I don't necessarily think of the framing way of it. So you can frame it however you want it to look, but that close kind of aspect, typically when you're in whatever millimeter size, so I'd say 35 to 85, that's what you consider portrait photography. Anything lower than that is then like landscape or interior photography, and then anything higher than that is usually action or telephoto pictures.
So I have a question on the action of telephoto. So I have a 500 millimeter. or
Sure.
whatever it is. Would you put the aperture priority on that, just for the light?
Depends. I mean, it's really up to you. It's based on what you're trying to get pictures of. If you're concerned about how much light is coming into the camera and how much of the foreground and
Or, I
background
mean, the
you're gonna
speed.
get.
I'm sorry, the speed. Like,
Oh, yeah,
say
speed.
you want to take a racing car.
Yeah, of course. Speed would definitely be the one to be a priority on. Yeah.
So you put on as as a priority.
Yeah.
so for Canon, Liz, I'm just asking this question. When it doesn't have the that red ring on it, is it not as a,
This is not as nice of a lens. The lenses that have the red ring from Canon mean it's their L series glass. So from corner to corner, edge to edge, you should have the crispest image, least amount of distortion, has the most coatings on the inside. And when I say coatings, they basically take a piece of glass and they'll take a brush with whatever chemical or whatever foundation is on there, and they'll spread it across the lens before inserting it into the body. Basically, if you see a red ring around your Canon lens, it just means that you have the top of the line lens for whatever that millimeter size is.
and what does the white one mean? Because I've seen that in a Canon, but I can't remember if they had a red ring on
Yeah,
it.
it doesn't necessarily mean, usually they do telephoto lenses that color. In the case, I don't really know why they do it that way. I've never asked that question before. However, I know that because it has this little orange G on there, this is a Sony G Master lens. So it's their top of
The
the line.
line.
Yep. I'd say both of those lenses combined, you're looking at like $6,000 worth of lenses.
Better be doing $6,000 worth of business.
Exactly. Photography is an expensive hobby. Prime versus zoom. Prime lens, lower aperture, more light let into the camera. One number though. So if you want to move and do things, you got to move yourself and kind of just change your parameters. If you're taking portrait photography or just anything where you're really concerned about light coming in, background to foreground separation, and that crispness, the prime lens is the way to go. Zoom lens, bigger lens, heavier lens, so keep that in mind too. Larger spectrum of numbers, so you can zoom in and out on the target that you're looking at. Lower aperture, even if you get the highest end zoom lens, it's still like 2.8 rather than the 1.2 or 1.4. And then I'd say the biggest pain with those is that they're heavy. So keep that in mind. I think there's one more lens that I talk about, the travel lens. If you are someone, I get a lot of people that come in that are like, I'm going on safari or I'm going on vacation, I don't want to carry 5 lenses with me, what do you recommend? This is a great one. 18 to 135 and a 28 to 400 nowadays. They have so many different versions of this. But basically what this is an all-in-one lens. It's going to be very similar to the kit lens. It doesn't have a lot of power to it. It's not going to let a lot of light in. However, if you can manipulate your camera and change certain settings and play with it a little more, this can still do some really great photos and have great accuracy. I call this the safari lens. I get customers who are like, I'm going to Africa, I'm going to see the lions, the tigers. What's the best thing to use? This would be great. You're going to get a lot of sun in Africa, a lot of sun in general. So the light that's coming in is going to be really great to help saturate your pictures. And this lens is going to basically prevent you from needing to constantly switch between Is this for, you know, the professional photographer? Probably not. But is this for the vacation photographer, the hobbyist? 100%.
This is a side question. Can you insure this?
Yes, there are ways. Obviously, they have like different warranty protections with it, but if you hit up your insurance agent, because of how expensive it is, they should be able to put it under some sort of plan. I don't know how, but I know you can.
Yeah. Okay. Especially if you start investing in so many like lenses and stuff.
Maybe this is like for a lot of people, their business is their bread and butter, so yeah, it would totally make sense. What lenses do you need? And I put quotations around that because in reality, if you just stick with the kit lens, you probably don't need any lens. But if you're really trying to find what the next best thing is, in the camera world, we call it the Trinity. There's the 50 prime, the 24 to 70, and the 70 to 200. This hits at every single number that you really need. You've got your 24 to 70 for walking around everyday photography. You have your 70 to 200 for action or shots that are just you need more zoom. Then you have your 50 for your perfect portraits, your perfect prime photos, the thing where you need the most amount of detail. You get 3 of these types of lenses, they're great. Now I say need because again, if you have a 24 to 105, then why do you need something that's a 24 to 70? If you're not taking portraits and you're just focused on bird photography, then maybe you don't need either, you just need the 70 to 200. If you're a street photographer and you're just walking around all day, maybe the 24 to 70 is better, or maybe scrap all 3 of these, I'm just gonna get the 35mm prime. That's one of my personal favorite lenses. Everybody's a little different, everybody requires different stuff. I think the most important thing that you can do is try to start with that kit lens, play with it, figure out what it is you like to take photos of, figure out what it is you like to do, and then from there, start investing in some of these higher end ones, because again, eventually it becomes an addictive pattern with these, and it's like, okay, well I bought this one, well, I really like this one, this is really sharp, and you can fall down that rabbit hole, but this is a good starting point. Oh, use the timer and camera apps. They're really great. Camera app lets you download photos, can let you edit the photos, but it also can act as a timer too. So if you want to take some more dramatic shots and maybe set the camera up, walk in front of it. I had to do headshots for some stuff recently, and when I had to do those headshots to build on my website, I basically set my camera up on a tripod, kept my phone in my lap, shot from the chest going up this way, and just would hit the phone for it to take the headshots of myself. Didn't need to have anybody come near me, didn't need to ask somebody to pop over to my place to help me with it. It was just something I could do on my own.
That's good.
Try to get through this quick, it's already 7:02, and I'm keeping you guys past the store hours, so I apologize. But basically, when it comes to content creation, if you are someone who's entering into this realm and you're like, okay, I'm gonna start my business, start, my Instagram, my TikTok, my YouTube, whatever it is, and you're wondering what do I need to get into it, video quality is an important factor. Proper lenses and proper camera body, just understanding the settings, that's a good starting point. Stabilization. Doesn't have to be something fancy like a tripod or a gimbal, but maybe a tripod is necessary, or some form of stand to hold the camera that you can adjust the height at a nice angle. Lighting, you can go on camera lighting, studio lighting, natural lighting. If you're going to use the lighting in your home, maybe just find a room where you can put in really nice light bulbs that give you a little more power for what it is, depending on what you're trying to take pictures and film of. And then microphones. If you're doing video and videography, shotgun mics. It's a microphone that sits on top of the camera. On-camera mics, that can be just the clip-on ones. That includes wireless mics. There's a lot of different routes that you can go with that, but keep in mind that if you're making videos, people can usually tolerate 2 things being good, 1 thing being bad. So if you're going to choose between them and you got money with what you're spending, make sure 2 out of the 3, or I'd say 2, stabilization and video quality, I feel like combine them. But video quality, lighting, and mics. Your sound, your lighting, and how it looks on the camera. Those are the 3 things. Make sure 2 of those look good, and people will care about what you're posting. If one looks good and the others look bad, then people start to fall off. Let's see if I have anything else. If you really want to get into content creation, a lot of the camera companies and brands have kits out there already that come with a little tripod stand, a remote, a microphone, which is really important to get started, just enough for you to get your feet wet without fully jumping in. Recommended accessories, if you're just getting into this, I always tell people that top 4 are probably the ones I think you need the most. Buy a bag. protect the gear that you just bought. You spent $1,000, $800, $900, even if you spend $200. Put them in a bag, protect it. Get an extra battery, get an extra memory card. Batteries go quick if you're taking a lot of video. Memory cards, we talked about that in the beginning of the class. Those have that copper strip on the back, so as you're using the memory card constantly, it can start to fry out. So just have another one on hand. Lens cleaning kits are great. I shoot for the Chicago Polar Plunge every year, and I am actually in the freezing water in January taking pictures. People love to splash the cameraman, and so people will just jump, water will fly, and if I don't have a cleaning kit on me, it's a mess. So just have something like a cloth. Never use your sweater t-shirt material. You put little microfiber, you put micro scratches into the lens, and over time it might be fine, but then eventually, like 5 years down the road, you're like, why is my lens not focusing? It's probably because you didn't clean it right. So get a microfiber cloth if you're a glasses wearer, you probably have one. And a camera strap. Most of your cameras came with them. If it's not enough, they sell ones with extra padding, they sell ones with really nice cloth material. Maybe you're a snob, you want some more leather on there or something fancier, you can find those out there. Tripod's great if you need stabilization. External hard drives, like what we were talking about, might be another great option. Filters are great. We don't talk a lot about filters, but if you have questions, I'll answer them. Additional lenses, like we talked about, and classes and workshops. That's my biggest thing. If you're a photographer and you're really trying to get into this, if you go somewhere and you don't bring your camera with you, I think you're silly. Just carry it with you, bring it around. If you're traveling, I had this weird phase where I was going to, when I was downtown for college, I'd bring my camera in with me when I'd go to stores. And I liked taking pictures of how products were displayed on shelves. I thought it was interesting of how they market that kind of stuff. But I also liked the symmetry of seeing 5 ketchup bottles next to each other and 5 mustard bottles. It was interesting. So it helped me understand my camera better, and I have these weird photos that I look back on sometimes. So just constantly be using the camera, constantly be doing stuff, it goes a long way.
And the classes, you're here every Thursday, but you said
Yep.
other days you can.
Yeah, if you come here any other day other than Tuesday, Wednesday, those are my days off. Just come on in, bring your camera gear. I'm in the small electronics department. I'll walk you through whatever you need.
Like Friday.
Sure.
Okay.
And then just other classes and workshops out there. Don't be afraid to be a student at all times.
Yeah, do you recommend any? I know just signed up for I don't even, it's like a club, like, I don't know, it's in Oak Brook, but.
Yeah, that's great. I don't have any recommendations personally. I'm not a part of any of them. I've studied this for so long that it's like second nature in my brain.
Okay.
So for me, I do it for myself, so I don't do the clubs and stuff, but they're awesome. There's actually ones at the Chicago Botanical Garden that I keep meeting all the time. They come in to buy stuff. O'Hare has a club too. You have to get special access, but they actually have a section on the tarmac. You can sit and take pictures of the planes.
Oh, wow.
There are people who take pictures at Union Station all the time. There are so many Chicago Historical Photography Group. There's a bunch, so you can find a bunch out there. But sign up for whatever. Bitterness of poor quality remains long after the sweetness of a low price is forgotten. Enjoy the fact that you're getting into photography. If you get a deal, you get a deal, but keep in mind that if you, I'd say lowball yourself, but if you buy something for the cheap and you think it's going to do all this wonderful stuff and it doesn't do it for you, you'll be bummed out that you wasted the money on the lesser gear when you probably should have just waited a little bit, saved up, and then bought the nice ride. Photography, it's one of those art forms where you can be amazing at it, but have a really bad camera, and it still's a bad camera, but you can be really amazing at it and have the best gear, and it's just going to look phenomenal. At the same time, though, you can have the best gear and not know what you're doing, and it just all falls apart. On the flip side, people sell paintings with Crayola crayons, so it's one of those things. It's a mixed bag. So, and that is all I have. I've talked your ear off for well over an hour and 40 minutes. So next Thursday is intermediate cameras. That's where we're going to be breaking down things like aperture, shutter, and then manual control. Bring your camera in. I think that'll be great for you. We'll talk a lot about that. I'm talking to a few other things that I can't remember off the top of my head now, but definitely is the next step up. Graduating from automatic, getting away from the basic controls of the camera and getting into something that's more controlled and purposeful.
So next Thursday.
Next Thursday.
5:30.
Yep, 5:30.
Thank you.
Up here.
What's your name?
Saxon.
Saxon. Thank you very much. How are you?
Anytime. It's nice to meet you. And yeah, I think that's good for now. I don't think anybody online has any questions, so I'll probably sign off from there. But if any of you guys have any questions for me, please ask.
So, oh, sorry, go ahead.
What you got?
If I go sign on to this,
Yep,
does
so-
it have a voice lesson?
It
too, or
has
it's just-
every video that I've taught, so you'll hear my
Oh,
voice talking
okay.
over every single presentation that I've
Okay,
done.
okay.
And there's probably 70 videos up there, 'cause
Oh, I
it
see.
records every class that we do. And so.
I see.
But worst case scenario, I'll be in tomorrow and then all weekend, just Tuesday, Wednesdays, only days off.
Yeah.
So hop in any of those days, I'll take care of it.
Okay.
I guess I have one more question.
Yeah.
You said my camera was set on something that I should take it off of?
I took it off. You're
You
all
took it
set.
off.
It was just that you had somehow it got switched over to timer mode, so I switched that off so it won't sound like it's a bomb anymore. And then the other thing was that you had ISO at 500, which kept it really low. So when you're saying the hallway shot you tried to take was a little dark, I set it to ISO or automatic for you, so that should help tremendously for those types of shots.
Okay.
So try with that, and if you're still having issues, then I'd say come in on a day when I'm working. Let's sit down and really go through it.
Okay. Thank you.
Of course.
Do you know what this is? There's like a button and it.
Yes, so the button is probably a function button, and you're shooting on the screen. So if you turn this guy on,
Okay.
and then press on the button. Look at the screen while you're doing that. Should tell us what's working.
Do you have any more of your cards?
It's
okay, I'll
But
put them.
they'll be down there for you. It's all good.
Thank you.
That's the other button.
You guys have a good night.
That might be timer. No, it's not. Looks like it's going to timer. I never triple check that myself actually.
Okay.
I do know that the switch though is from automatic focus to manual focus.
Oh.
So switching that. So keep it on AF if you're doing standard photos, and then
Yeah.
if you want to be adventurous, MF for the video.
Okay. Got it.
And what else you got?
Do you know what these ones are?
So this is going to be a grid pattern that shows up on there. So if we have this off, we focus in, press it again. That's going to not do a grid. It's going to then remove everything on the side of the
Oh.
screen. So if we then take that off, you get a clean image.
Okay.
Press the trigger again. Now everything's back on there.
Oh.
This guy on the top, I have to triple check that one actually. Let me see what the asterisk is.
You can also tell me next week, because
Okay.
I'll be here next week.
If that works for you.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
fine.
Cool. Anything else?
No, I don't think so. Cool. Thank you.
Of course.
So I got here at actually 4:30,
Mm-hmm.
but then I thought I kind of know what I need to buy,
Sure.
and then it turned out because of the lens issue,
Yeah.
Erin helped me downstairs, and because all these
Thank you.
Take care.
terms are like just so foreign
Yeah.
to me. So he had to explain it to me over and over,
Mhm.
and then at the end of it, I think this is what I got.
It's a great setup.
So now, like some of the things I didn't quite get it with him downstairs. I mean, because poor Aaron, like he had to repeat, and then I
You're
sort of
fine.
got it. It's sunk in.
It's
little
gonna take a
better with-
while. It's gonna be. It's
with
not the
you
easiest.
explaining, I think today.
Okay.
So my question is, I picked this up.
Yep.
So I told him my goal is actually just initially, because I know nothing about photography.
Sure.
Because I always had those like a little auto thing. If I did anything, it's almost like using phone.
Yeah.
And long time ago, we used, well, we still do, I guess, a Nikon camera that came like with everything.
Mhm.
But we never really used like a bunch of
Sure.
different ones. We just always just used whatever came with the camera.
Yeah.
So now I'm actually like I have my daughter who's like a teenager, high school
Mhm.
student, and I wanted to actually take photos of her, but I wanted to kind of see if I can get to the point of like making almost like a professional quality,
Yeah,
so
of
that I
course
don't
you
have to hire a
Yeah.
photographer
Absolutely.
eventually. But
The setup that you have for that will absolutely give you that. Or that.
Give you all of that.
I think the biggest thing, what I tried to stress in the beginning of class, was shooting on automatic settings and just keeping it simple for now. Because if you overwhelm yourself with the controls and everything else, that's where then people are like,
but
I don't want to touch
I
this.
just thought this like I have no idea, and
Yeah.
I don't think they gave me a manual.
Yeah, some companies don't. They'll actually save it and then you can look online for it.
Okay.
My biggest recommendation for you
Yeah.
is just keep it on automatic. So
Yeah.
keep it on the green.
Mhm.
And that's really about it. Just keep firing and taking pictures from it. Then everything starts to present itself and make more sense. The other thing I would probably do is watch a YouTube video or two on just this camera model by itself, the A6600.
Okay.
Just ask, 10 things you didn't know about the A6600 or getting started with the A6600.
Okay.
And you'll find videos that are 10 minutes long all the way through 2-3 hours long.
Okay.
I would start with a 10-minute video not to overwhelm yourself, but no, as far as the camera goes, this is a great starting point. 18 to 50 is going to give you that wide angle to portrait. So again, depending on what your daughter's doing, if you just want to take a really nice shot of her, 50 is great. If let's say, it's prom and she is standing in front of, a really nice fountain with her date and you want to get all that in the shot, you can then zoom down to get to that 18 to really get a crisp picture.
Oh,
And that's what the
okay.
idea with those numbers is it just changes the length, the focal length of the lens.
Okay, okay.
From there, then, it's just playing with it and familiarizing yourself more with the controls.
Where does this go in?
When we open
Can
this,
I open it and put it in?
yeah, of course you can.
So you think this lens is actually
100%. I think it's a great lens.
I don't know what to open it. Just open it.
Yeah. Throw the garbage in here, that way it's
okay.
up there for you.
Yeah.
So,
Wait a second.
for this,
Yeah.
I'll take this part from you. Take that. So with this one, little latch on the bottom, that opens up, and this opens up like that. Clamshell. We'll open this out, close this. Best part with these SD cards is we don't have to do much. There's no prep or setup work for them. We open up the bottom of the camera where the battery goes.
That was the battery, yeah, okay.
It is the battery,
Oh,
but
right
it's
here.
also the slot.
Okay.
Just follow the grooves. If we look at the card, it kind of is
Yeah.
fat on one side,
Mhm.
thin on the other. So we just follow that same pattern. We push, and it should be spring activated. So
Yeah.
it goes this direction. Push in. We can feel the give that it's giving. We're gonna push through that until we hear a click.
Right, okay,
Once we hear that click, it's done and it's closed. We just push up on the latch.
okay.
Now we're good. From there, we can put the lens on the camera. And it's up to you and how you're traveling with it. This is a pretty small lens, so you probably don't need to take it on and off constantly. However, you can if you really want to.
Oh, I see.
I would recommend taking it on and off if you're traveling, like getting on an airplane or doing something. If you're gonna put this in a bag, it's better not to keep this camera in a bag with the lens on. It's better to travel with it off, if that makes sense.
Off.
Yes. So, the way this works, here's what I would recommend.
Take it off.
Yeah, so you'll take it off, but the way you do it is you'll
Oh,
turn,
just turn.
so counterclockwise. Now typically you never want to let this be exposed to air for too long because dust can settle in there and then that ruins the photo.
Sure.
So I like to scroll this off. Then once I get this to where I want it, I flip the camera upside down. There's going to be a white dot on there. There's a white dot right there on the camera. I'm going to line those up, and then I'm now going to turn clockwise until I hear a click. Once I hear that click, it's locked in, it's not going to go anywhere. If I want to take this off, I'm going to hold that button on the bottom there,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'm going to turn counterclockwise.
Okay,
Once I feel that I'm all the way at the end, that pops off.
okay.
So dot to dot, turn clockwise, hear the click.
So this filter, I know you said also it prevents from
Yeah.
scratching,
Yep.
but you have a,
You do, but eventually you're going to take this off to take pictures, and some
also
people.
you use this to take
Yeah.
pictures?
Yeah, you use it with that on. So yeah, I'll show you. So this is just a pure light standard filter. So this is a great everyday filter. In the future, if you ever really get into something, get into this more, and you're like, okay, we've got outdoor photos and there's like water in the background, then you can get into polarizing or neutral density filters. Those are like your sunglasses. They cut down on the light that's coming in. I wouldn't worry about that too much. The idea with this is that it's a piece of glass surrounded by metal, and it's a nice protection for the front of this glass.
Okay,
And that just gets threaded on like a screw.
so it doesn't really do as far as like producing certain type of photo other than just protecting the lens?
A mix of both. So
Yeah.
sometimes when you look at sunlight and light cuts through on the lens, that's where you get like a ray of light that shows on this, and it just doesn't look good. That's where this is supposed to help. So it's a mix of, it protects it if you just drop this thing straight
Yeah,
down,
yeah.
or if you're getting like this weird light, should cut through it.
So can I put the cover on this over the filter? Oh, because it will fit.
Yep,
Okay.
they keep it that way for that exact purpose, but
Okay.
yes, it absolutely is a good idea to have that.
Okay, so the filter should be on it like all times.
Keep it on all times,
Okay,
yeah.
okay, okay. Yeah, so I put it on auto and try to take it, cause I just feel so clueless.
No, you're good. So
Okay, so this is, hold on, let me see what this is.
let me log
This
off
is
the
for
video for everybody. Thanks everybody.